Hello guys, Burrock here. It has been a start to a very long journey of getting progress on the level, and I can tell you that I have made a lot more of progress than it actually seems. For context, I averaged 5 hours of playtime per day on this month. I'm talking about per day, not even per stream. I've streamed 33 times to the public and 9 times unlisted. I spent 173,627 attempts and even managed to stream over 20 hours on one singular stream session. And I still have not managed to get 10% on this level. Sit down, relax, get some snacks, because we have a lot of things to talk about. My first struggle with this level when I started playing was this part on 3% and this wave on 8 to 10. The reason why this part made me struggle a lot were these two timings that I specifically talked about in my recent progress report video. If you haven't watched my first progress report, then I highly recommend you to, since I have talked about a lot of the struggles I had with the level. The reason why these timings were so annoying to deal with is that not only they require extreme accuracy, but they're also very unsight readable. The wave part at 8% has spikes at the top that are completely invisible and requires you to enter in a specific way. You have to specifically release for a fraction of a second that depends on how early you pass for the recent timing. If you release early, you have enough time to prepare yourself to hold upwards at this ridiculously hard and unsight readable timing. If you release late, however, you have to do literally a reverse microclick to pass through the tight gap. The fact that the time you have to press changes depending on the previous timing is really annoying, adding the fact that the timing is almost invisible, difficult, and happens to the last percent into the first 10%. The wave doesn't consist of just this timing though. There are a lot of invisible timings in this part that requires a lot of practice to master. Matter of fact, almost half of the attempts I've spent on this level is to this particular wave section. And we have just talked about 8 to 10 here. The first 8% on the other hand is much harder. Trust me when I say that. In fact, it is so hard that I decided to completely ignore the first cube section and directly focus on the easier parts like the 5% and the 7% mini-cube parts. These parts are not that difficult, but still considerably difficult to the point that they'll still be eligible for mainless gameplay. The two things that made me struggle is this release hold on 5% and this extremely hard to sight read green orb at 7%, which took me around 20,000 attempts to master. I will not mention these parts a lot since they're trivial compared to the wave, the first cube section we'll talk about later on, and as I mentioned in the first progress report, this mini cube section at 3%, especially this timing. More approximately, these two timings. They're not only very hard to sight read, they're also extremely difficult to pull off. This black orb timing has a 4-frame window of 240 FPS, and this blue orb timing is even harder with a 2-frame window on 240. Not to mention that there's this timing, which is again a 3-frame timing of 240 FPS, and these two yellow orb timings, which is easy compared to the other 3 jumps, but still a run killer. I have spent almost 30,000 attempts on trying to get consistent on this section, and I will probably spend even more attempts since I'm still very inconsistent at it. On month 1, this wasn't really that big of a deal since I did runs for 3% and everyone would take like a second before I could try again. With this method, I attempted to get 3 to 10%, and spoiler alert, I managed to get it 3 days after releasing the first progress report video. Yes! 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 I got 3 to 10! Let's go! Let's go! But now, since I got 3 to 10 and got a lot more consistent at the wave and the cube parts following, I started to attempt runs from 0, which made the lack of consistency at 3% problem a lot worse. And that is not even the biggest problem when it comes to going for 0. The biggest problem that I have ever faced in the first 10% of this level was these 2 jumps right at the beginning of the level. When I first started playing, I ignored these jumps at the first cube entirely since it felt too awkward and difficult for me to pass. But when I get 3%, I had to start practicing this part of the level, which made me realize how much I've underestimated the difficulty of the first cube. I decided to playtest this part, and turns out both of these timings are 240 FPS frame perfects. To put how diabolical this part is, it took me over 30,000 attempts just to get a 5% chance of passing these jumps alone. This wouldn't even be that big of a consistency problem if the first 5 seconds of the level wasn't empty. Every single time I fail on one of these 2 jumps, I have to wait for another 5 seconds to try it again, and with each fail, that adds up. To pass this timing just once, I have to spend 2 minutes on failing. And that's only when I'm consistent. There are some instances when I had to spend up to 15 minutes just to pass these 2 timings once. I've made a consistency challenge named Mindbreaker, which repeats these 2 jumps 10 times throughout 12 seconds, which made me get more consistent faster, but still, this is a huge problem for me to get good runs from 0. I've also made different challenges like this one that repeats this awkward jump 100 times, and this challenge which repeats the cube part at 5% 10 times, but those are for when I get really inconsistent with the easy parts of the level, and so I did not waste a bunch of my time to these challenges. I'm seeing this clearly as a person who played this level for over 170,000 attempts. If this level had the same gameplay as the first 10% for the rest of the level, this level wouldn't be just top 1. It would have been literally impossible in standards of moderate skill limits. The level wouldn't have just 20 240 FPS frame perfects, but also a lot of invisible timings and brutal gaps that would have made the level unplayable. I'm going to do a recap of all parts in this level. Firstly, we have these 240 FPS frame perfect timings to the beginning of this level. Then, we have 2 jumps followed with a nearly invisible reverse micro click, which is completely dependent on how accurately you do the first clip. But, to put in simple words, you have around 4 frames for both of the timings, which is still stupidly hard for a reverse micro click. Then, we have this blue orb, which is luckily not that hard. On to the second cube, we start with a block jump that has a 4 frame gap, 1 black orb timing that is trivially easy, 2 yellow orbs that are around the same difficulty as the block jump, and these 2 ridiculously hard jumps that require precise inputs in order to land accurately. The black orb timing is 3 to 4 frames on 240, depending on your frame alignment, and the blue orb is 2 frames on 240. Then, we have 3 of these awkward jumps we have to do, 2 on the second cube and 1 on the third cube. These timings are not that difficult compared to the harder timings, but can be still painful to deal with when you have it to do it multiple times. Then, there's this blue orb hole thingy that has a 7 frame reaction time, but it is extremely unsight readable due to the portals covering up my icon, and the fact that calculating the way that the cube will go is very hard to do. There is one specific green orb timing that's extremely easy, but once again, is also very unsight readable, which caused me to die there a lot when I went for 3%, especially due to me panicking when I get that far. There are some other timings that are not that hard to pull out, so I'll skip over them. The wave part has also a lot of invisible parts to introduce, such as this invisible release timing that is the very first choke point, the wave entrance to this section being awkward to have a better chance at the following parts, and especially this 4 frame window click and release that's pretty hard to spot out. Rest of the level is not that difficult as long as you manage to stay consistent. I don't have a lot of burnouts in this level, since they don't affect me that much at all. I've played a lot of levels such as like Q-Key, Silent Unknown, and Planet of Corruption, and I've spent tens of thousands and even hundreds of thousands of attempts on them. I got a lot of burnouts out of them, and they don't affect me that much since I've experienced a lot of them, and at this point, I've become numb to them. Because of that, I won't be talking about burnouts in this video. For my future expectations and for my progress, for my attempt count, I was expecting it to be somewhere in between 150,000 and 170,000 at the previous month. At the end of the second month, as I said at the start of this video, I managed to get 173,627 attempts, which was definitely more than I expected. But still, considering the fact that I spent so many attempts on the first 2 jumps and streamed a lot more compared to the last month, it shouldn't be a surprise. For my expectations for the previous month, first of all, 3 connected runs. In fact, I'm willing to drop that to 2. I'm expecting 2 connected runs on Mercury, as well as a 3 to 10 run, as well as getting the entire level in less than 3 deaths. And I managed to get 3 to 10 twice, 6%, and 9 deaths on NoClip. Which means I got 2 connected runs, 3 to 10, but not 3 deaths or lower on NoClip on the first 10%. And to be honest, I do think that's a little bit too extreme, since with that consistency, I will probably try to get 10% without NoClip instead. I've additionally managed to beat the wave on 8 to 10 over 90 times, get a 99.4 NoClip accuracy run from 0, and beat the first 2 jumps 3 times in a row. For my future expectations, I'm expecting to directly get 10% on month 3. I've got so consistent throughout the rest of the level that I could confidently say not only I could get 10% once, but twice at least. I could also beat the first 2 jumps of the level 5 times in a row and get 3 to 10 over 10 times. For my attempt count expectations, I would be expecting a number in between 220 and 250,000, spending around 3 to 4,000 attempts per session. That's all everyone, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on my streams and my Discord server that's linked in the description, and on my next progress report video.